Hello dears, I'm Fatima Najat, Assistant Professor in Biochemistry, PG Department of Microbiology, Majlis Arts and Science College, Autonomous. Through this session, students will be able to describe what is the protein and the functions of protein in living organism and its classifications. Let me start with what is protein. Proteins are polymers of alpha amino acids, L-alpha amino acids. We know that amino acid moiety present in proteins are alpha isomers. All amino acids are alpha amino acids, and we know that more than 50% of dry weight of our cells are contained of proteins. So that the most abundant biomolecule in living organisms are proteins. Proteins form the fundamental basis of living life and the structure of the cell. And we know that based on the function, proteins are classified into two: structural function of protein and dynamic functions of proteins. The proteins present in our body have two functions. One is structural function and the other one is dynamic functions. The first one, structural functioning proteins. These proteins, structural functioning proteins, will provide strength to the cells and it will provide strength to these tissues. It will be present in cell membrane and it will present in the structure of the cell, and it will provide structural integrity to the cell and it will provide strength to the cell. For example, elastin and collagen like proteins present in the bone matrix and other organs and vascular system. These proteins are structural proteins. And another one structural protein is keratin. Keratin, which is present in our skin, epidermal tissue, which is present in our hair, nail, etc. The second type is dynamic functioning proteins. These have diversified functions in the nature. This include a protein which act as hormones, enzymes, immunoglobulins, blood clotting factors, etc. This provide diverse functions in our body. It's the proteins which provide overall functions of our body, and we know that in nature they have around 300 amino acids, but 300 amino acids, they have only 20 standard amino acids. What is standard amino acids? We know that standard amino acids are the amino acids which are involved in the proteins. Which proteins? Functional proteins. That means which are the moieties of the which are made up of that amino acids, which are standard amino acids. Standard amino acids are involved in our genetic code, and these amino acids are present in functional proteins, or these amino acids are present in the structure of functional proteins. We can summarize some functions of the protein. We know that proteins have diversified functions in the nature. First of all, we can say that proteins are structural functions. Proteins provide structural strength to the cells and it has the structural component of the cell. It's called structural functioning proteins. The next one, proteins which act as enzymes. It will catalyze the reactions, catalyze the rate of the reactions. And next one, the proteins which act as hormones. It will regulate the metabolic pathway of the body. And another proteins which act as immunoglobulins, which act against or which fight against the infections or any toxins or any antibodies or antigens present in our body. They are called antibodies or immunoglobulins. Such function are also provided by proteins. Then and the another function of protein is regulation of pH of the body, temperature of the body, and osmotic pressure of the body. These all processes are provided by, or proteins are responsible for the regulation of pH, temperature, and another factors of the body. Some another proteins responsible for the transport of ions or molecules across the membrane. These proteins are called transport proteins. Now we can look for the classification of proteins. Proteins are mainly classified into three: simple proteins, conjugated proteins, and derived proteins. Simple proteins are the proteins which are made up of amino acid moieties only, or amino acids, it's made up of only amino acids residues. And conjugated proteins are the proteins which are made up of amino acid with the moieties other than non-amino acid substances or non-amino acid compounds. And derived proteins are the proteins which are obtained by hydrolysis or degradation of primary and secondary proteins. Then the first type, simple proteins. Simple proteins are proteins which are made up of only amino acid residues. These simple proteins are again classified into two: globular proteins and scleroproteins. Globular proteins are proteins which have globular shape or spherical shape or oval shape. Scleroproteins have fiber-like structure. And globular proteins are which contain albumin, globulin like proteins. And in scleroproteins, it have elastin, keratin, collagen like proteins. The second type, conjugated proteins. Conjugated proteins are the proteins which are complexed or conjugated with the non-protein moiety or non-amino acid moiety. These proteins are made up of amino acids which are conjugated to non-protein molecule like carbohydrate, lipid. For example, nucleoproteins, glycoproteins, lipoproteins, then metalloproteins. In metalloproteins, it have protein, and with that it will have some moiety of metals. In nucleoprotein, for example, histones, it have proteins, also nucleic acids. The third type, derived proteins. Derived proteins are the proteins which are obtained by hydrolysis or degradation of the simple proteins and conjugated proteins. Derived proteins are of primary and secondary. The primary derived proteins are the proteins which are obtained as the first product of the hydrolysis or degradation of the simple protein and conjugated protein. But in secondary derived protein, it's the product obtained after the breaking or hydrolysis of peptide bonds. That means it's secondary derived proteins. Next we are saying the simple proteins. Simple proteins have two types, globular protein and scleroproteins. The first type of globular protein is globulin and albumin. This is serum proteins. The albumin present in milk is lactalbumin, and the present in egg yolk is egg albumin. Then it's also present in serum, like blood cells also present in serum. Then another prolamines which are present in plants, and glutenins are also present in plants. Then another proteins like lectins, which are carbohydrate binding proteins. Globular proteins are soluble in water. It easily gets soluble in water. Histones are also a globular protein. It's present in with nucleic acids, and it's called nucleoproteins. But histones are simple proteins which are globular simple proteins. The second type of simple proteins, fibrous proteins. Fibrous proteins have fiber-like structure, and it will provide strength to the body. The types of fibrous proteins are keratin, elastin, etc. Elastin present in the elastic tissues of our body like tendons and arteries, and collagen is also a type of fibrous protein. It's present in the tissues and matrices of our body. And then keratin, which is a type of fibrous protein, it's present in the hair, nail and skin of our body. The next type of conjugated protein is lipoproteins. Lipoproteins are the proteins which conjugated or complexed with lipids. These are helpful or useful for transportation of lipids in our body. Lipoproteins are mainly seen in brain and membrane of our body. The third type of protein is derived proteins. Derived proteins are the product of hydrolysis or degradation of simple and conjugated protein, first two types. It have primary derived protein and secondary derived protein. Primary derived protein is the protein which obtained as the first product of the hydrolysis or degradation. In this primary proteins, primary hydrolyzed proteins or primary proteins, they have coagulated proteins. It gets coagulated by heat or acid or any substances. This type of proteins are called coagulated proteins. Or metaproteins, which get hydrolyzed or the product obtained by using heavy acids or substances. And then next one is proteins, which are obtained as a product as a result of the action of enzymes. The secondary derived proteins are the second type of derived protein, which is the product of the degradation or hydrolysis of product, which is obtained by the hydrolysis of peptide bonds present in the protein. This is secondary derived proteins. So this is all about this topic. Okay, today we discussed the functions of the protein. First of all, we discussed what is protein. Then we discussed functions of the protein in living organisms. Then we discussed the classification of the proteins, classified based on the structure and the function of the proteins. This is all about this topic. Thank you.